Hello and welcome to Breaking Ground on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we chat to industry experts to get a view on what's happening on the ground and to learn about new trends emerging within the construction industry. The show is brought to you in partnership with Place Engage, a data-driven platform for more successful public consultation and community engagement for your next development project. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Donnacha Tobin, Divisional Director with Capcon Engineering. Donnacha, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Carol. Delighted to be able to talk to you finally.
Well, do you know, I'm delighted to talk to you as well, because actually I have heard you speak most recently at the National Construction Summit in Blanchardstown in April, and I was fascinated to hear about some of the work you're doing on projects. And, you know, sometimes I think I mentioned to you on the day that it's really interesting to hear about all the multidisciplines that feed into the delivery of a successful project. And I realized that I wasn't alone in not being familiar with the type of work that you do. So I'm really glad we had the opportunity to talk about this today. But before we get into maybe the company, tell me a little bit about your own background. What is it that you do, or how did you qualify?
Yeah, so I'm a quantity surveyor by trade. I qualified in 2012, and when I qualified, there wasn't a whole pile of work in the construction industry in Ireland at that time. So, like many of my peers, I got on a plane and I went to Australia. I had previously done some work in Ireland. I'd actually done my placement with Capcon Engineering as well. So I got kind of a bit of a feel for rainwater systems. Moved to Perth for a while. Found myself working with rainwater systems again out in Perth. Lived there for about 18 months. I came back to Ireland, and I've been back with Capcon since, I suppose. When I came back, there was a lot of work on. It'd gone very busy over in the UK. Some projects on in Ireland. You know, it was around 2014, late 2013, early 2014. Things were just starting to pick up. So yeah, came back on originally as an estimator with them, and I suppose I've been kind of working my way up through the company since, and I've been divisional director now for the last number of years as we've been growing through a significant growth period, I suppose, in Capcon's journey.
Very good. You know, when I hear you talk about the rainwater drainage systems, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is that the needs in Ireland and the UK, to my mind, would be very different to the needs in Perth. So maybe explain the work you were doing in Perth.
Yeah, well, it's like, funnily, it's actually the intensity of the rainwater that you get in Perth, or even, you know, we do some work in Southeast Asia as well at the minute. The intensity of the rainwater that you get in them climates is far in excess of what you get in Ireland. And in Ireland and even the UK, you kind of tend to deal with more consistent rain. It's raining quite often, but typically not as heavy. In Perth and Singapore and other regions like that, you're dealing with flash floods. You're dealing with kind of monsoon weather where you get, you know, extreme, maybe a full year's rainfall in Ireland could fall in a couple of hours. So I suppose it's just, there's little nuances in designing them systems to make sure that the building is fully protected and it's going to cater for the needs of the building.
You know, it's funny when you talk about the extreme weather. I remember I used to live in Spain, where the desert meets the sea, and there was only the couple of weeks where you'd see rain during the year. And I remember the first year living in that area, we weren't familiar with not just how and when it rained, but how the rainwater traveled through the town. And locals understood how it traveled through the town, and there was gullies there, and you could tell the foolish tourists who parked their cars, and those cars got washed out to sea. And you know, it made me realize why we complain a lot about the rain in Ireland. Actually, the moderate level, although I know obviously that's we've seen changes to that, but the moderate level means that we can essentially design different systems, as opposed to if you are getting a huge deluge a couple of times a year or a couple of months of the year, as you might see in Southeast Asia or indeed in Perth. But then just maybe explain, because we jumped kind of straight into the drainage systems, but maybe take us through the company offering and a little bit about Capcon. I didn't realize you had done your that you had kind of done your early work post college with them. So that's a bit of a full circle moment to come back.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, I kind of came back and there was a few different offers on the table, and you know, I kind of decided a short-term thing, and it was a couple of weeks to Christmas. I came back to Capcon to give a bit of a dig out before Christmas, and I'd evaluate what I do in January. And yeah, more than 10 years later, I'm still here. So I was obviously happy with the decision, I suppose. So yeah, in terms of Capcon, I suppose, and even the journey of the Capcon, it's historically our background was we were rainwater drainage contractors, so full service designing, supplying, installing, maintaining rainwater systems. So primarily internal rainwater systems. So it's large scale construction, pharma buildings, commercial buildings, large scale apartments, data centers, buildings where you got large scale roofs where the drainage has been dealt with internally. That's kind of been our bread and butter. So as I say, historically, that's what we were. We were full service contractors, essentially designing and installing the rainwater systems. You're typically engaged by the main contractor or the mechanical contractor at that stage. Over the last 5 to 6 years, we've got two clear divisions in the company now. So we still have our full service offering where we're doing kind of full service projects all throughout Ireland and the UK. We do some of them in Europe as well. That's still, as before, designing, supplying, installing, commissioning, maintaining, signing off on these systems. And we also have another part of the business, which is our design consultancy business. So 5 years ago, we kind of, I suppose it was really architects and consultant engineers reaching out to us specifically for information on the rainwater system. It's an unusual package in that the ownership of it can be quite blurred. Sometimes it's the architect's job to design it and ultimately sign off on it. Other times it's consultant engineer. It's quite a grey area, and ultimately, or oftentimes, neither actually want that responsibility, and in some cases aren't even insured to design the system. So, the typical engagement used to be kind of to kick the rainwater can down the road as far as you possibly can until you get to the stage of appointing someone. On smaller projects, that can work okay. On large scale projects where time is of the essence, when you get to site, you want to make sure that there's nothing that's going to come in and have a massive financial or cost impact. Not just on the rainwater, but it's the other trades as well. Because the rainwater, you have to get the rainwater from the roof to the ground. Some way of doing it. So if that involves moving other services, you're going to have to move other services. So by leaving that very late in the day, they were causing serious issues on projects. So that led to us to start up the design consultancy side of the business. And that allows us to get on board early days on projects, kind of working on the client's behalf directly to the architect, consultant engineers. And we're designing the rainwater system alongside all the other services. So it really just means that when that project gets to site, there's no nasty surprises. There's no program delays. Typically, you're saving in the region of 30-35% because you've got a system that's designed much more efficiently. And I suppose that the big thing there with the efficient design, you end up with a design that it's far more sustainable. We're often taking about 70% of the raw materials out of the job because we're designing the exact system for each individual building. So rather than trying to make a system fit around the services that are already there, we're taking a look at the building. We're looking at, right, what is the best drainage system for this building? Factoring in, the local area, the rainfall intensities, the rainfall patterns locally, and designing a system that's going to be sized sufficiently, but also provide the protection to the extreme weather events that we're getting more and more commonly. So a long answer, but yeah, there's two divisions in Capcon.
No, but well, actually, the early engagement piece and how you integrate with the project design teams at an early stage, that was the piece I think that was really surprising when you were presenting at the National Construction Summit, and I could see people kind of sitting up and paying attention and taking notes and taking photographs of your slides. And I always use that, when I moderate events like that, I'm always watching that as an indication of, because I'm always very aware that the people sitting in the audience are far more expert than I. So when they sit up and start photographing slides and taking notes, so I know something new has been said and something interesting has been said, I think it's an interesting approach as well, because it mirrors a lot of what we're seeing across the supply chain. So whether it's for the integration of offsite and other modern methods of construction, or for so many other reasons across various different sectors, when delivering that, actually pulling the team together and working well as early a stage as possible, it seems to be not just about how to maximize those savings, although actually that 30 to 35% stat is fairly stark. That would make people sit up and take notes, all right. But it's understanding how the supply chain works together. I know speaking to some construction leaders in Ireland, certainly over the last few years, they would have particularly if they're working across Ireland and the UK, they would have certainly pointed to maybe a level of maturity, say, in the UK market across the supply chain that was somehow missing in Ireland. And a huge part of that is around the allocation of risk. So by bringing you in at an early stage, if you're being brought in by the main contractor, does that mean that the main contractor is able to reallocate a portion of risk essentially to Capcon for this element of delivery?
Yeah, well, ultimately, the Rainwater system, when it comes down to it, is a contractor design package. So the risk will come on whoever ultimately designs the system at the end, so the likes of ourselves. So that's going to happen anyway at some stage. But I suppose through the early engagement, what's happening is that risk is being passed on earlier in the project. And it means that you're at the design table with the other members of the design team. So as all other services are being coordinated and they're finding the spaces within the model to try fit all pipe work, all services, all the ducting in together, the Rainwater is actually being designed at the exact same time. So you know that what's gone in that model is actually what's going to happen on site, as opposed to just maybe leaving a placeholder or kind of having a rough ideas and hoping that the Rainwater is going to fit in that space. Getting a specialist to actually design it who focuses on these systems, it means you're utilizing every bit of space. There's no wasted space, or nothing missed, which is the other thing. Often in terms of the risks, sometimes these systems, if somebody's designing them, they don't have the in-depth knowledge, say that we have. They often think, right, well, we'll just install really large downpipes. We'll put really big downpipes on it, and we'll be absolutely fine. But they may not be looking at the outlet. So you could have a pinch point at the outlet. The outlet may have significantly reduced flow versus the flow that downpipe can have. So you can have as big of a downpipe as you want, but if the water can't make its way through the outlet in enough time, you're going to build up a load of rainwater on the roof before that can drain away. So you're putting unnecessary risk on that roof, which likely won't be factored in, which likely won't be part of anyone's design risk consideration as they're going through the project. So these are the things that can be eliminated and detected early in the project by engaging someone like ourselves early, as opposed to kind of kicking the can down the road as the historic approach has been.
Looking across the different sectors in which Capcon are operating at the moment, would there be a higher level of awareness, say, for some sectors over others? So, for example, if you talk across general commercial building, logistics buildings, you touch there on data centers, would you find across the different sectors and maybe across the UK and Ireland, would there be varying levels of, I suppose, awareness from main contractors about not just what stage to bring you in, but actually the role that you have to play?
Yeah, I think it's improving the whole time, and I think particularly like the tier one main contractors in Ireland are now very much so at a stage where they're quite like what the tier one contractors in the UK would be doing. It would be very common for us to get a contract 18 months before we're going to start on site from a tier one main contractor in Ireland. So they're aware of that. The design teams are what we typically find, for a design consultancy service, that when we work with a design team on one project, they get us on the next project, and then they typically within a short period of time they virtually have us across all the projects, because they can see, I suppose, the benefits by having someone on board doing this service at an early stage, and then it streamlines the whole process moving forward. In terms of projects, the nuances between the different projects, I suppose your high-tech projects, your data centers, your pharmaceutical projects, they tend to be, there's probably slightly more emphasis put on to the early stage design on them projects, because when they start on site, they tend to want progress to happen very quick, particularly with the data centers. There tends to be very tight programs where works just have to be going at a very rapid pace once they start on site. They're more oftentimes you get engaged a little bit earlier with them. Residential projects, actually, interestingly enough, we often get early engagement on them to do the designs. The main issue there is just space is at such a premium. So you want to minimize the amount of riser space that's been taken up, any horizontal pipe work and corridors. So by engaging early on them ones, we're getting all them things boxed off early. We're minimizing the amount of space you need with the Rainwater system to allow them utilize the space for other services then as well. But yeah, I'd say that the awareness, I'd agree with your sentiment as well, that the UK probably was ahead of Ireland. I think Ireland is catching up, and catching up quickly. The large architects, consultant engineers, they're very much on a par with anything that's in the UK now as well. And the tier one contractors as well, as say that they're they are getting on board with getting these things bottomed out much earlier than used to be the case.
Yeah, and that's really positive to hear. And it's good to hear that from somebody who's actually operating across the different jurisdictions. In terms of the sectors that are keeping you and your team busy right now, where are you spending most of your time? Which sectors?
Probably pretty evenly split. Four largest sectors would probably be commercial, residential, data centers, and pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
They would be the four large sectors working. But we would always work like we install on virtually every type of sector you can imagine. We've done airports, we've done stadiums, we've done you know, retail units, large scale fulfillment centers, warehouses. We've worked across virtually all sectors, but I suppose them four would be the kind of commonly the largest.
And looking at your pipeline, again, we've seen the latest tranche of construction industry reports coming out in the last 2 to 3 weeks. There's certainly a bit of a mixed bag with some confusing data in terms of, low completions, high starts, and definitely sectoral differences for sure, with commercial taking a little bit of a hammering. So just in terms of your pipeline for the next kind of 12, 18 to 24 months, where are you seeing your future work coming from?
Yeah, we've certainly seen commercial take a bit of a back seat over the past. It's been happening really for the last 24 months, really. We would have probably prior to COVID, at any given stage, 50+% of our work would have been commercial, 50-60% of our work would have been commercial. And gradually that's been in decline. So now it's roughly kind of 20 to 25%. You still have the large scale commercial projects. Some of them still seem to be going ahead, but residential has really picked up over that time. So when our commercial was kind of the numbers were going down slightly, residential has taken up quite an amount of that. There's a lot of pharmaceutical work going on at the minute as well. And as well, there's still a certain amount of data centered work. Less in Ireland than there has been over the last number of years. There's obviously the planning constraints there at the minute. But in the UK, there doesn't seem to be any end in that. And there's a lot of refurb work as well. There's a lot of brownfield sites being used in the UK as well, where they're getting an existing building and repurposing it. Them kind of buildings, typically the drainage won't be fit for purpose. So an ideal scenario to get someone like ourselves in to design a system that will work, that will be fit for purpose, to bring it up and in line with modern codes and standards, and then ultimately that system that's fully signed off. So when you've got your end user moving into the building, they know they've got a system that's certified and it's going to work. And there's, again, de-risking the building. Nobody wants to think about rainwater, but also nobody wants rainwater in the building. So it's very important to have it right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting now, just as you say it, I suppose I hadn't considered the retrofit market essentially for you, because I was only thinking in terms of developments and new builds, but of course, the scale of retrofit that needs to happen now, particularly if you're looking at change of use, or trying to come up to building regulations, and sustainability drivers have really influenced maybe some of our approach. So how is that changing? How is that changing the approach that you're taking, particularly on retrofits? Because that's a really interesting sector and one that we know. I mean, the most recent figure in Ireland is something like, including residential, 500,000 buildings. And I think according to the latest GeoWalks data, we're about 18,000 of the way into that 500,000. So that's a huge body of work to be done that I hadn't really considered, that a number of those buildings would obviously fall to you. So how have environmental changes and regulatory drivers actually changed your approach?
Yeah, so I suppose originally how them inquiries started coming in, there's a few different things on the retrofit side. So we get the inquiries from buildings where maybe they're having issues, particularly in the UK, you've got quite an established market, buildings 20, 25 years old, prior to BS 12056, they're just not compliant with current codes and standards. So when we go in and look at a job, you can quite quickly see that, right, well, look, the issue here is this system just isn't fit for purpose with today's codes and standards. The code didn't exist when they were designing it, so it wasn't like the system was poorly designed at the time. The codes didn't exist back then. So we work with the client then, a lot of this is budget dependent as well. Some clients, they want to get a system, depending on who's moving into the building, depending on what's being used there, depending on the value of what's in it. Some want to completely get the current system up to modern codes and standards. Others want to go through different steps. So I suppose we work with the client on that to kind of develop a scheme. Sometimes it's a full new system. Sometimes it's kind of supplementing it with a secondary system. So you're increasing the capacity of the drainage without maybe touching that existing system. It may be undersized, but it may actually be working just fine. So we may need to just put a secondary system in with it. So it's very much so working with the client to kind of find a solution for the retrofit market. And we can do that. There's no one size fits all in terms of the retrofit market, but we have options for virtually all of the scenarios. In terms of the sustainability, then, a big part of what we do is siphonic drainage. So we do siphonic and gravity systems, but siphonic drainage would be a much more sustainable solution versus your traditional gravity. Typically, when you compare a like-for-like gravity system with a siphonic system, you're using 70% less raw materials with a siphonic system than would be the case for a like-for-like gravity system. You're minimizing the amount of excavation that's required. You're minimizing the interface with follow-on trades. There's less deliveries to site. There's less time, actually labor time spent on site as well, which, labor concerns are probably the biggest issue everyone's facing at the minute, and trying to actually get enough resources to carry out all the work that needs to be done. So all these things are helping design kind of systems that are more efficient than would have traditionally been the case with your traditional gravity systems.
And I mentioned that when you presented at the National Construction Summit, that this was definitely one of the most engaging presentations where we saw the industry sit up and take notice. And I think when you were actually going through the different systems, that was when people really became engaged. And I know that was the subject to quite a significant kind of Q&A session afterwards. So I know that that's something that is of interest to the industry. So where can people go? Is there a resource section on your website where people can go to just learn a little bit more about that? Because I think that seemed to be the one that piqued the most interest.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information on our website itself. So if they go there, it's probably the best place. They can see a bit of information on gravity systems, siphonic systems, maintaining these systems as well. So it's www.capconeng.com.
Super. Thank you so much, Donnacha. I know we have to finish up today, but before we finish up, I do have something that I want to ask you about. You touched on it at the start of the interview, just because a huge amount of our work right now is how do we attract talent that is working overseas? How do we bring them back home to Ireland, knowing that they'll likely come back home to Ireland at some point? How do we get them back home now when we need them? And just when you talked about how you were in Australia and you came back just to maybe do a couple of weeks to help out before Christmas, probably because you were going to be home for Christmas anyway. It's interesting that you talk about Christmas, because actually that's when we ramp up any of our employer branding activity, and it's when we do the most of our construction recruitment, because exactly that, we know people who've been working away, irrespective of what country they're in, they tend to come back for Christmas and they tend to take an extended break over Christmas. So that's we use that time to try target what you were a number of years ago back to Ireland. So can you just tell me, what is it what's the message that Ireland needs to be putting out so that young people like yourself who've been working for a couple of years in other countries but know that they want to return to Ireland, is now the right time for them to return and bring that skill set with them? And if so, what's the message we need to be putting out to them?
Yeah, I think it's as much as the message, it's the messaging and how it's delivered. Like, there's a lot of the media can be quite negative at the minute, and everything is doom and gloom. Ireland's a great country, and I know it's not brilliant for everybody, and there's people on difficult times and that, but like there's a lot to really like about Ireland. There's a great community. There's again a great sense of pride of place in Ireland. It is a good place to live. The people are typically very friendly. It's very safe. There's a reason why so many people emigrate from Ireland and move abroad and work abroad. But the vast majority of them, I have a good few friends living in America, living in Australia, living in different parts of the world. They'll all still say Ireland is home. Ireland is where they want to come to. And I suppose it's showing them that it is an option, it is a possibility, that that it is, as point you touched on earlier, that Ireland's maturing as a market. It is a mature market, and there's going to be jobs here for the foreseeable future. That it's not something that, I know previously Celtic Tiger times was a bit of, boom and then bust. And I suppose there's still a bit of a maybe a little frightened about that, about maybe, set a life up for themselves in Australia or America. And it's like, well, do we come back? Are the wheels going to just come off? But it's a much maturer market than that now. And it is, it's about championing what's good about Ireland, I suppose, as much as anything else, because it is a great place to live. The people are great. There's a great community to it. It's a construction industry in Ireland. It's a great industry to be part of too. Like, there's a lot of it's a big industry, but it's a small industry. Like, and everybody tends to know each other as well. And there's a good sense of community in that as well. So yeah, I think really it's just championing the positivity of what's there, as opposed to the doom and gloom that you sometimes get from the mainstream media.
Do you know what, Donnacha? Honestly, I couldn't agree with you more. And you're absolutely right. We need to champion what's good. You are such a great advocate for the construction industry. So I'm so delighted to have had the opportunity to speak to you today. And again, your presentation was definitely one of the most where the industry audience was definitely so engaged that we knew was the topic we wanted to cover. So I will, of course, include the link to the Capcon Engineering website there, because I know it's information that the industry wants. So thank you so much for taking the time to go through it with us today. Thanks a million, Donnacha. That was Donnacha Tobin, Divisional Director with Capcon Engineering. My thanks to show producer Katie Tallon and to the production team at Hear Me Roar Media. Also, thank you indeed for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of Breaking Ground. In the meantime, please be sure to check out all of the other Irish and international real estate and construction shows here on iPropertyRadio.com.